When it comes to movie genres that were popular during the golden age of Hollywood, I would say that none had a harder fall from grace than the Western. For a time considered one of the premier genres and all around beloved by the public, the genre was dead by 1980, and since then, most of the westerns that have come out go out of their way to deconstruct the westerns of old as much as possible, trying to make it crystal clear that they were not accurate portrayals of how people on the frontier really lived. And this is in addition to westerns of old often being held in pretty low regard by modern audiences, with many seeing them as nothing more than a blatantly inaccurate retelling of history made as an excuse to show action-oriented gun violence that doesn't offer anything of value. But the thing is, that couldn't be further from the truth. Because while it's true that most westerns from the golden age of Hollywood were most definitely not accurate to real life, they still had plenty to offer. Frankly, westerns were considered one of the best genres of their time for a reason. And today I'd like to explain why I believe this genre deserves to be more loved and respected than it ultimately is. And minor spoilers for one or two movies may abound, so if there's something you don't want ruined, you might just want to be on the lookout. Okay, so if most people were to bring up westerns from the golden age of Hollywood, the two biggest complaints lobbied against the genre as a whole would be that they were never accurate to real life, and that they often depicted simple black and white morality, in addition to other complaints, of course. But the thing here is, these people kind of miss the point of westerns. They weren't really meant to reflect real life. They were more meant to show humanity at its rawest, to show what people will do under the most extreme circumstances. Or to put it another way, most westerns were about a group of characters exploring what it means to be human in a lawless, unforgiving land where anything could happen to them. The hero was often a man that either desperately clung to his morals or had to be reminded of the good person he once was through the compassion of somebody else. And the villain was either a greedy opportunist who's forsaken his humanity for his own gain, or somebody who was wronged in some way and ultimately couldn't cope with it, leading them down a very dark path. So, to put it simply, to say that westerns always had black and white morality is completely untrue. As I just pointed out, if anything, westerns were more apt to have anti-heroes and complex villains than almost any other genre out there. The problem is that most people mix up genuine westerns with the ones of the 1930s, and specifically the singing cowboy movies starring the likes of Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, which were very kid-friendly in nature and always had black and white morality, with the good guys triumphing over the bad guys. But the thing was, before TV, movies like these needed to exist so that parents could take their kids to see something. And that's what some people forget, that before there were TV shows, there were serialized movies that acted as children's entertainment, and those included westerns. But they in no way reflected what the genre actually represented or what it was truly capable of. Because as I said before, at its core, the Western was all about humanity and what it truly means to people. And since most Westerns take place in the lawless American frontier, what better place was there to explore such concepts? The idea of what one is willing to give up to survive, and how tightly a person will hold on to their morals even under the most extreme of circumstances. And you can find that in pretty much any Western out there from the golden age of Hollywood. The idea that if you lose yourself and give up your humanity to achieve a goal, no matter what it is, then you'll be a lesser person than if you have nothing but stick to your principles. That's even where the Code of the West trope comes from. It's an attempted compromise from people who've given up some of their morals, humanity, and integrity, trying to hold on to what honor they have left by setting up rules they will not break no matter what. But in the end, they almost always have to break them for some reason, and that's what tends to separate the heroes from the villains. Because the ones that break their code for the wrong reasons will end up usually losing their humanity completely and die a villain, while the ones that either will not break that code no matter what, or breaks it for the right reasons, will usually regain their humanity and earn redemption, making them firmly the hero no matter what happens next. And that's another thing most people don't give Westerns enough credit for. Many of them hinge on a character needing to decide if they'll be a hero or villain, or otherwise abandon their humanity and morals for material gain. And it might surprise you to learn that characters didn't make the right decision as often as you'd think. And if they do make the wrong choice, then generally, but not always, there's only one fate left for them. And please note that this doesn't just apply to the hero and villain either, but every character in the story. The sidekick, the love interest, the comic relief, the villain's henchman, the nameless bartender. You can find any of these characters in any given Western pondering over whether or not they made the right choices in life, and just how much of their humanity they're willing to sacrifice or regain in service of something. And that's why the romantic aspect can be very important to Westerns too. Because while some might say it's just a somewhat cliche story of a woman seeing the best in a seemingly horrible man and bringing out the good person he once was in the process, those old Westerns had a knack for telling this very effectively when they did choose to use the romance that way, that is. Sometimes they even work as a good contrast to each other, showing that the woman had been through just as much but held on to her morals, but the man just couldn't do it. And it's after realizing this that they decide to change for the better, no matter what it costs them. And not to mention, this also happened quite often with the genders reversed. It wasn't too uncommon to see a woman outlaw or con artist that's persuaded into changing for the better because of the love of an understanding man. Basically, when it came to Westerns, no two character types, no matter what they may be, were ever mutually exclusive. And the same cannot be said about many other, more well-regarded genres of the same era. So my point here is, while most of these stories may not be historically accurate, they didn't need to be to tell some frankly great and thought-provoking stories. Most Westerns had a real integrity to them, even the ones that were made just for fun and didn't have complex themes. But the ones that did used the template of taking characters and character types and placing them in the roughest, lawless, hardest to survive of places, and from there emphasizing through those characters that one must never lose themselves, their morals, or their humanity to even the harshest of circumstances. And again, They didn't shy away from the fact that not all people are able to do this, and that sometimes people will succumb to the pressure and temptations around them, or need a lot of prompting to do the right thing. That's a major reason why redemption is another element present in so many westerns, because they often featured a character who did the wrong thing, something they regret, or had sold their humanity for something that was ultimately worthless, and desperately want to make up for it. But the circumstances of their environment make it really difficult for them. And I don't know about you, but I believe all of this is worth something. It might not reflect history so much, but it's still telling stories worth telling, imparting lessons worth teaching, and valuing things worth valuing in people. The Western isn't meant to represent the real-life American frontier, but instead a more mythical, metaphorical place where the best and worst of humanity collide and are ever present in a battle for the fate of every person alive, with the general outcome being a more optimistic one, showing that the good in man can triumph over the evil, but not without a cost. And once again, I honestly think there's a real beauty in that, as well as a lot of really valuable lessons that can be taken away from that. So for people to just dismiss these movies simply because they weren't historically accurate is kind of missing the whole point of them. And it's for that exact reason that I actually hate the Western High Noon, because it tries to tear down and destroy everything the Western represents without offering anything of value in its place. Instead, it's the story of a jerk coming to kill the sheriff of a town full of jerks, with the only message seeming to be that nobody will ever come to your aid no matter what, so there's no point in helping people. So in the end, all it is the ultimate mockery of everything the Western is meant to be, and doesn't even say anything worth saying for it. And before somebody runs to the comments to say it, don't try to tell me that the moral is about justice being everybody's job rather than just the law's, because while it may superficially appear that way, that's ultimately not what it's saying at all. Trust me, if you look for it hard enough, you'll see what I'm talking about. This movie has a very different message than most people think. And not to mention, the story is contrived as heck. It's probably no more accurate to real life than any other Western of the period. And yet, why is it this one that gets so much love? Probably because it sends a cynical message that goes against its own genre. Those tend to stand out to audiences more, regardless of whether or not they're actually good. Now listen, hate me if you want to, but I just felt that was something that had to be said. There are so many other westerns, and even movies, better than this out there that most people haven't even heard of. But I'll only get more into this if you guys are interested. For the moment, that's all I'm going to say on that. So to get back on topic, when you really get down to it, most people might be quick to think of gunfights when they think of westerns. But it's the story and meaning behind those gunfights that made westerns truly special, and unlike any other film genre. The action served a narrative purpose. The gunfights, the brawls, and the chases, and all the other fun parts weren't the reason for the movie being made, but were instead there to serve as the culmination of characters' decisions and consequences. Though, as I touched on before, I guess you could say that westerns did tend to show the best in humanity. Particularly how some will always stay true to themselves and their morals even in a lawless, unforgiving land, the value of friendship and romantic love, the dangers of losing your humanity, and that there's always a chance for redemption. But at the same time, they also showed how forgiving the world can be, that sometimes bad things happen to good people for no reason, and that it's up to them to still do the right thing, that there are scrupulous people out there willing to take advantage, or even kill, anybody to benefit themselves, and that some people just aren't capable of redemption. And I just have to say, I don't see anything wrong with those messages or values. Those are things worth saying and teaching to people, especially because it's both optimistic but still realistic at the same time. Now, if those themes I mentioned sound familiar, they honestly should, because George Lucas used a lot of those same themes when writing Star Wars. Yes, that's right. Some of the most important and core themes of Star Wars originally came from Westerns. Lucas even said that in addition to modeling Star Wars after Flash Gordon, he also wanted to give it a very space Western type feel to it. And considering just how well and effective he was able to integrate those themes and ideas into Star Wars, he must have had a very great understanding of the genre. And when you also take into account how much those same themes are liked, talked about, and encouraged today in the context of Star Wars, that only further proves my point that Westerns weren't just about pure, flawless heroes that kill bad guys to save the day, but about something much deeper, something much more valuable, and something more truthful about the world. Something more human. Because John Wayne, for example, didn't just play the cowboy that comes riding in on his horse, saves the town, and then rides off into the sunset. Instead, his characters tended to be deeply conflicted people who struggled with what he must do versus what he knows to be the right thing. Wayne was actually very good at portraying men of a very morally conflicted nature, and he honestly doesn't get enough credit for it. But it just so happened that his characters did usually choose their humanity and the right thing most of the time, and that was what made him the hero. Not the fact that he could look cool on a horse, or the fact that he could kill the bad guy. No, it was the fact that he could still do the right thing and stand by his morals no matter what he was up against. That was what made him the hero of most of his westerns. Now, please do note here that there are variations of this, as with anything else. But in the end, the point still remains that when it came to westerns, the good guys were always the ones who managed to survive, or even thrive, while keeping their humanity and morals intact, or otherwise regaining them after seeing the error of their ways. And once again, this doesn't apply to just the hero, but to all the other characters that can be considered good guys as well. Because as I said before, redemption, betrayal, and moral conflict was by no means just relegated to major characters in westerns. Anybody had the potential to indulge in everything I've discussed here, and did so more often than you'd suspect. Now, obviously another reason for some people's dislike of westerns is some of the more, outdated aspects of some of them. But that's pretty much just because they were a product of their time. Any movie of any genre released at the same time could and most definitely had suffered from the same problem, simply making those aspects an unfortunate consequence of the period. And the only reason the Western tended to depict this more is because the setting often called for these aspects to appear in the first place. But that doesn't mean that there's anything inherently wrong with the genre because of that, as many Westerns who got these outdated aspects correct have proved many times over. Okay, so my point here is, some outdated aspects to them aside, the Western was really a much richer, valuable genre than most people give it credit for. Sure, it wasn't accurate to real life, but that wasn't really the point of them. They were much more about teaching us all a lesson in humanity, to show just how important things like love, friendship, honor, and redemption are when a person doesn't have or can't rely on anything else. And I don't know about you, but as I've already said, I believe that's all very important, and things that people shouldn't be so quick to throw aside or dismiss. Because for the 100th time, just because Westerns weren't historically accurate and the real Western frontier was a very different place than most of those Westerns imply, doesn't mean that they don't have their own merits. Frankly, the lessons that can be found in Westerns are some of the most valuable out there, and they tend to deliver these messages very effectively at that. To put it simply, I believe it's about time that the Westerns of old be reevaluated, because not enough people realize, apart from some outdated elements, that these movies still have a lot more to offer than their collective reputations would imply they do. Okay, I think that's about everything I've got on that. So now I think it's about time that you all tell me. Do you believe that the Westerns of the Golden Age of Hollywood are a lot better, deeper, and meaningful than most people give them credit for? Or do you believe they're simply inaccurate, fluffy mockeries of actual history? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, you are entitled to your own opinion here. Just because you watched this video doesn't mean you have to agree with anything I said. And if you think I was wrong about everything I covered, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you all next time.